we've said before, Nora, every time we have this discussion, we say we hope it's the last time, but we know that we have to come back to this. I mean, there's good news in the sense that this narrative just keeps falling apart, and there's bad news that they keep trying to revive it. So I guess let's start with the good part of that, which is the revelations, more revelations that actually, let's start with, if you don't mind, the story about 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Nora, you'll remember her.
Yep.
We spoke about her in our live stream on December. And Tamara, maybe you can just put up item 1 on the list I sent you, which shows us just a reminder of when we spoke about 𝐓𝐡𝐞 back in December. And let's look at item 2, Tamara. And this is a new article I've done detailing in more detail some of what we're going to talk about today. But if we just scroll down, you can see that right there, this was that screenshot there. I don't know if we can zoom in on it, but you can see that's a Haaretz story from the end of November. And that's a picture of Elkayam-Levy, 𝐓𝐿 Elkayam-Levy, who was everywhere in the media at that time, claiming to have, claiming to be the head of something called the Civil Commission to investigate these claims of mass rape. And if we go to item 2B, Tamara, you can see that just actually a few days after that Haaretz article, 𝐓𝐿 Elkayam-Levy was actually welcomed at the White House by the Joe Biden administration. And you can see there in the official White House statement on that meeting from December 7th, 2023, they identify her as the chair of Israel's Civil Commission on October 7 crimes by Hamas against women and children. But what has emerged in the last few days is really quite incredible. It turns out that Elkayam-Levy won the Israel Prize. This is Israel's highest civilian cultural honor. It's awarded by a committee of the great and the good in Israel, and it's administered by Israel's education ministry. And there's been a lot of infighting about this in Israel, and we're the beneficiaries of this because what has emerged is, as so often when Israelis fight amongst themselves, is they tell truths that we're not supposed to hear. And so it turns out, and this was reported, we can go back to the story, to item 2, Tamara. It turns out that now in Israel, 𝐓𝐿 Elkayam-Levy and her civil commission are being exposed as a complete fraud. And it's really incredible. According to יידיעות אחרונות, this is one of Israel's biggest newspapers. They did a report just a couple of days ago, and they actually find that her civil commission doesn't exist. It's a one-woman show. There is no civil commission. And moreover, the report which she won the Israel Prize for, this is supposedly a report detailing the crimes, the rapes, the sexual violence on October 7th, that report doesn't exist either. She hasn't written any such report. And she seems to be something of a financial grifter. And so it's according to Ynet, what she's been doing is going around asking for money. She has this organization she calls the Devorah Institute, and they've been sending around a budget for their work on this so-called civil commission for 2024, a budget of $8 million of which 1.5 million is earmarked for management and administration. And she's been collecting a lot of donations. It's even been reported that she got a donation from Rahm Emanuel, the US ambassador to Japan and previously the chief of staff to President Barack Obama. And on her website, on the Devora Institute, it lists the government of Canada as one of her partners. I wasn't able to confirm in the time I had that she's actually received funding from the Canadian government, but that's something that particularly our viewers and friends in Canada should be inquiring into. And I don't know, Nora, do you want me to go into some of the sort of juicier revelations that have come out about this fraud?
Oh, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
it's really important. I mean, there's just the title of her grifty organization, the Civil Commission, sounds like a normal government assembled sort of entity, but
And it seems to be that she was presenting it
yeah,
as some kind of official Israeli body.
right.
And in fact, Ynet, the Yediot Ahronot, quotes an Israeli government source saying that the following, this is in Ynet, at first she was very active and it was very nice. And then she started calling herself the Civil Commission. People got confused. Members of the US Congress turned to people who work with Israel and asked, what was this about? Did Israel create a commission? It's a confusing name. And of course, she didn't create a commission, but she did apparently even fool the White House. Whether they wanted to be fooled or not is another question. But they introduced her as if, or they spoke about her in that statement as if she were an Israeli official. But here's what this Israeli government source says to Ynet, and to the question of, is there such a thing at all? Is there such a body? The answer is no. She is the body. She is the Civil Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And this same government source says that people are sort of treating her as kind of a pariah now in Israel because this is, again, the government source quoted in Ynet, people disconnected from her because her investigation is not accurate. And they say that she disseminated, for example, a story about Palestinian fighters slicing the belly of a pregnant woman, a story proven to be untrue, and spread it in the international media, end quote. That's actually what the Israeli government source told Ynet. And to be clear, the Israeli government source here is not saying, oh, this is bad, spreading these lies is bad because it's an injustice to Palestinians. They're saying spreading the lies is bad because it damages our hasbara, our public relations efforts, and we're already having enough trouble in itself. But let's take a look at this, because this is actually a big story in Israel. Ynet reported on it, and Channel 13, which is one of the main TV channels in Israel, also did a report on all this fraud coming out. And let's take a look at that report. And what we'll do is we'll watch it. It's got, we have translated it from Hebrew and put English subtitles. We'll watch it, and then I will summarize some of the points in it afterwards for those who are listening. So you're just going to hear the Hebrew now and see the English subtitles for those who are watching.
רביב דרוקר, ערב חדש, מבוכה חדשה סביב סאגת פרס ישראל, והפעם?
כן, דוקטור כוכב אלקיים לוי עשתה עבודה, היא חתנית כלת פרס ישראל, היא עשתה עבודה ברוכה וחשובה בלי שמץ של ציניות בהעלאת המודעות הבינלאומית לזוועות המין שבוצעו על ידי החמאס. אבל התהייה עולה, קודם כל, היו מספר נשים מאוד בולטות שעשו פעילות בזה, לא ברור למה לקחו דווקא אותה ולא נתנו לכולן, רות אלפרין קדרי,
פרופסור יפעת ביטון,
שאשא ביטון, פרופסור ביטון, לא
שאשא ביטון. כל הזמן טועים.
נכון, סליחה.
כן.
ועוד כמה וכמה. הנימוק שנותנת הוועדה המכובדת בראשות יהורם גאון, הוא שהיא חיברה את דוח הזוועות אלא שפה אנחנו מגלים שאין דוח זוועות, פשוט אין דוח כזה, לא נכתב דוח כזה, לא על ידה ולא על ידי אף אחד אחר חוץ מגופים בינלאומיים דווקא. יש איזה מכתב שהיא שלחה שבועיים אחרי האסון, אחרי הטבח של 7 באוקטובר, שהוא ריכוז כותרות מהעיתונים, מכתב של כמה עמודים בודדים, ואין דוח כזה. אנחנו שואלים אותה הערב על הדברים האלה, וגם על הקשר המשפחתי שלה, היא אחייניתו של יעקב ברדוגו. הנה הדברים שהיא עונה.
בטח שיש דוח כזה. הדוח הראשון שיצא, כבר ב-20 באוקטובר, דוח שסקר את הפשעים שראינו, את המידע הכי מהימן שיכולנו לתת ברגע הראשון לגופי האו"ם. אין לי עוד מה לומר בנושא, חוץ מזה שאני גאה במשפחה שלי.
הבנתי, יש דוח כזה.
כן, אז כאמור אפשר להראות את הדוח עוד מעט על המסך. זה מכתב של 4 עמודים, עמוד אחד זה חתימות, עמוד אחד זה אמירות כלליות, ושני עמודים זה כותרות מהעיתונים, פשוט אף אחד לא ידע עוד כלום ב-20 לאוקטובר. זה לא דוח במובן של זה וזה עשו בבחורה האיש שחס וחלילה נרצחה, זה הפשע, זה הראיות. אין דוח כזה. היא טוענת שהם עמלים על דוח כזה, אנחנו נשמח מאוד שהוא יצא יום אחד, אבל אם זה נימוק הוועדה, למה היא כן ואחרות לא, אז הנימוק הזה פשוט לא תקף ולא מחזיק מים.
מה אומרים במשרד החינוך?
במשרד החינוך אומרים, דומה לה, כנראה זהה לתגובה שלה, שהיה דוח קודם, והיא עומדת על דוח חדש, ומדברים על כך שהיא הפעילה נציבות אזרחית להעלאת המודעות. צריך לומר, גם הנציבות האזרחית זה שם מאוד מפוצץ, הנציבות זאת היא, והיא זאת הנציבות. אין איזה גוף גדול, נציבות שפועלת בכל העולם, זאת היא, פעולתה ברוכה, זה שרק היא מקבלת.
So what you can see there, that's the report that appeared on Channel 13, and that's the reporter Raviv Drucker talking to the anchor there. And the context for this is that there's sort of professional jealousy. Why did 𝐄𝐥𝐞 get the Israel Prize when supposedly there are other women who've worked on exposing the as we now know, non-existent October 7th mass rapes. But what he says, some of the key quotes, he says, they mention her starting a civil commission to raise awareness. It bears mentioning that the name civil commission is very bombastic. The commission is her and she is the commission. And he says that she was also the head of the Israel Prize Committee, said that Elkayam-Levy received the award because she authored something called the Horrors Report, a report that supposedly would detail the sexual violence on October 7th. But then Drucker says, we realize that there is no Horrors Report. There is simply no such report. It hasn't been written, not by her, not by anyone. She claims that she did write a report at the beginning in October, and that's when she started to gain this international prominence. But what Raviv Drucker says is that that's just misleading. He says it's a 4-page document, 1 page is signatures, 1 page is general statements, and 2 pages are just newspaper headlines. It's not a report in the sense that he and him did to that girl who, God forbid, was murdered. This is the crime. This is the evidence. There is no such report. So the whole thing appears to be a scam that was promoted by none other than the Joe Biden White House by receiving this woman and giving her the chance to present herself as if she were heading some official investigation. And as noted there, Raviv Drucker points out that there appears to be some kind of nepotistic element to this, because Elkayam-Levy is the niece of a man called Yaakov Berdugo, an advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu and a right-wing commentator on Israeli army radio. But that's not her only connection to the Netanyahu administration. As I mentioned, her organization, the Devorah Institute, which an Israeli government source described to Ynet as a one-person outfit asking for $1 million donations. It has on its advisory board the director, a former director of the Israeli Prime Minister's office, and 3 former officials from the Israeli National Security Council. So, and then just one other thing to say about this. the Ynet story points out how she disseminated false propaganda, these atrocity claims. But that was known early on and was reported by other independent journalists, including Max Blumenthal. So let's just take a look at Tamara at clip. This is item 3, the video, which shows her actually lying at an event in Harvard. I think this was back in November.
Another image shows the body of a young woman stripped from the waist down, her underwear torn, hung on one leg, and she was photographed on the site at the Nova Music Festival.
All right, so that clip there, where she's claiming to describe a photo of a woman, a victim at the Nova rave or festival that was attacked on October 7th, was in fact a photo of a Kurdish female fighter from 2022 and not in Israel, in another country. So this fraud was exposed from early on, but it has now been exposed in the mainstream in Israel. But you heard it here first.
And of course, none of that interview from Channel 13 that we showed has been transcribed in English, except for the Electronic Intifada. I mean, wouldn't the New York Times want to look into that?
You would think, because remember, this person was everywhere in the media and she was given credit, and it's why she won the Israel Prize. So she fooled people inside Israel and outside Israel.
Right.
And let's see, now that she's been exposed within Israel, if any of this makes it out into the mainstream media in the West, where so many people continue to insist that these lies upon lies about October 7th should be taken seriously. Yeah.
And just one more point on the Devora Institute that she heads. It's her operation. That they are taking tax-deductible donations from, like if you're in the U.S., you can make a tax-deductible donation to this fraudulent, grifty organization through, I believe it was the Jewish Communal Fund.
That's right, the Jewish Communal Fund of New York.
Yeah.
And also, and she's certainly, as we said, according to the Israeli press, collected a huge amount of money. And that's not uncommon, because what we've seen also is other organizations involved in the October 7 lies about atrocities, burned children and beheaded babies and so on, like 𝐓𝐡𝐞, have also been going around. And our colleague Asa Winstanley actually has a new story up on EI about 𝐓𝐶, and noting how they went around after October 7th and have been collecting huge donations on the back of the lies that they're telling, genocidal lies against Palestinians.
Right. So related, there have been new revelations further debunking the New York Times's infamous Screams Without Words story from December. You just published something on that yesterday. What's new there?
Yeah, I mean, this is really incredible, because people will recall the Screams Without Words story. We've talked about it extensively at the end of December by Jeffrey Gettleman, Anat Schwartz, and Adam Seller, that has fallen apart. Absolutely nothing is left of it in terms of its key claims. And yet the New York Times is still has it up. And there was this one story in it, one particularly horrifying story, where it's claimed that an Israeli army medic on October 7th went into a house in Kibbutz Be'eri. This is one of those colonial settlements we've talked about repeatedly, and saw the bodies of 2 teenage girls in a room. And I quote from the New York Times story of December 28th. And again, I warn viewers that this description from the New York Times is graphic. This is what they reported in December about the 2 teenage girls allegedly found by this Israeli army paramedic. Quote, one was lying on her side, boxer shorts ripped, bruises by her groin, The other was sprawled on the floor face down, pajama pants pulled to her knees, bottom exposed, semen smeared on her back. The New York Times also says that the paramedic did not document the scene and that they only spoke to this Israeli military member with permission of the Israeli army and on condition that he not be identified. So again, the sourcing was already very vague. And as we pointed out when we addressed this story back in January, it had already been debunked by Mondoweiss. Then in early March, it was debunked again by The Intercept, which actually identified the two teenage girls, and they did an extensive story showing that they were not, in fact, sexually assaulted. And then comes the New York Times, which just yesterday published, on March 25th, so this would have been Monday, published a story conceding that this claim in their original report is false. And they say, quote, new video has surfaced that undercuts the account of an Israeli military paramedic who said two teenage girls killed in the Hamas-led terrorist attack on October 7th were sexually assaulted. And they cite footage taken by an Israeli soldier, quote, which was viewed by leading community members in February and by the Times this month. And it shows the bodies of 3 female victims fully clothed and with no apparent signs of sexual violence at a home where many residents had believed the assaults occurred. The kibbutz Be'eri residents who viewed the footage said that in no other home in Be'eri were 2 teenage girls killed, and they concluded from the video that the girls had not been sexually assaulted. And I'll also add that the UN report by Pramila Patten that we talked about and wrote about at the Electronic Intifada, that we criticized for really regurgitating mostly Israeli government propaganda. Even that report says that they could not substantiate a single claim of sexual violence in Kibbutz Be'eri, and that several of the most prominently reported claims, and I believe that includes this one, were unfounded, in the words of the UN report. And there's another wrinkle here, which is incredible, which is when we went back and looked, these 2 sisters, and they were identified as N, and they were identified by The Intercept as Y and N Sharabi, aged 13 and 16. One of them was actually missing for more than a week after October 7th and was not identified. Her body was not identified until late October. So that makes it even more bizarre that an Israeli paramedic could have claimed to see all this. And that's to say, it's hard to sort out now what actually did and did not happen. But all of these contradictory details that were known at the time the New York Times published its original story should have made them stop and look for corroboration before publishing this story, but they did not do that.
No. And I mean, now that their original story, the New York Times' original story, has now been fully debunked, little piece by piece. There's really nothing left of that story. But is there any indication that it's planning to, correct Screams Without Words, or do what it should be doing and retract and apologize?
So far, no. The only thing the New York Times has done is they inserted sort of a misleading update into the original story, as if this story hadn't already been debunked at the time it was published in December. So they're trying to give the impression that this is new information, when in fact it was already known that this story was false or unlikely or dubious at the time they published their story, but they didn't want to know it then. So they don't call it a correction, they call it an update. And we wrote to the New York Times and asked them if they still stand by the original Screams Without Words article, if they're planning to retract it, if they've carried out an internal investigation. And they haven't replied to us. See there's the update on the screen.
Right in the middle.
They say newly released video viewed by the Times. So they're trying to give the impression that the story was solid prior to this newly released video, when in fact the story had already been debunked at the time they originally published it in December.
Incredible. I mean, he said this at the beginning, but like, will this issue ever end? What updates can we possibly update to this like already completely, dissolved story?
Well, it's curious. So the New York Times publishes a story on March 25th, debunking its own reporting, which it's still confusingly standing by at the same time. And then the next day, they publish a new sensational story. This one here we see on the screen with the headline, "Israeli hostage says she was sexually assaulted and tortured in Gaza." And this is a 4,000-word story about an Israeli woman called Amit Susana, who was held in Gaza for several weeks, and she was released in November. And now she's claiming, she's come out and said that while she was held in Gaza, one of her guards, a man she identifies as Muhammad, forced her to carry out a sexual act, which she does not describe in detail. And they build a 4,000-word story about this. There's no way to know, she may be lying, she may be telling the truth. We can't evaluate that. What we can say is this is very curious that this is coming out now, 4 or 5 months after she was released. If we look at item 6, she gave a press conference in January. And again, this was now, I would say, she was released at the end of November. So this is more than a month after she was released. She gave a press conference in January, which is on video. We've watched the video, in which she makes no mention whatsoever of this assault. Now, you could say, okay, she didn't want to talk about it. Very well. But what's, again, been pointed out, if we look at tweet 7, by, if I may call them, friend of the show, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, the anonymous investigator who has revealed so many important details about this, that when this story was launched yesterday by the New York Times, it was part of a coordinated push by Israeli government accounts that were all suddenly pushing it, as if it somehow corroborates the lies about mass rapes on October 7th. There's important things to point out here, which is that the 4,000-word New York Times story about Amit Susana doesn't use the word rape. It doesn't claim that this incident, if it happened, was part of any systematic pattern. It describes an isolated incident, and it actually quotes Bassem Naim, a senior official of Hamas, saying that we would want to investigate this because Hamas has been very clear that they do not tolerate this kind of assault on captives. But it's really, again, the context of this is so important because the New York Times is devoting 4,000 words to this one alleged incident. When, if we take a look, Tamara, I don't know if we can bring up tweet number 8, which is from Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur from the UN Special Rapporteur on human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, and we saw a clip of her in the news brief. And here's what Francesca Albanese said on March 24th. She said, "I lost count of how many renowned journalists interviewed me on the alleged mistreatment of and sexual abuse against Palestinian women by Israeli forces, and never published an article on this." So that's the context in which we have to look at this Amit Susanna story. I don't think we can be engaged in a debate about did this happen, didn't it happen. Even if it did happen, as I noted, it doesn't provide any corroboration whatsoever for the claims about October 7th. It doesn't describe any kind of pattern. And we have to ask why the New York Times would focus a massive, huge story on this while continuing to ignore, along with the rest of the mainstream media, the testimonies and evidence of sexual abuse and humiliation and mistreatment of Palestinian women and men by Israeli forces that are coming out continuously.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, the silence speaks volumes there. What can we learn from this? Why, just for a minute, maybe we could just talk about the timing of this, as Israel is, flouting the UN Security Council resolution, of course, for a ceasefire, as it continues to cut off UN aid deliveries to the north of Gaza, as Israel becomes more and more of an isolated pariah state around the world. Why does the New York Times and other outlets like it continue to launder these stories of hoaxes, developed and put out there by grifters?
They're deeply complicit in this. I mean, these stories are being planted, being shaped with the Israeli government. The original Screams Without Words story was largely sourced from the Israeli military. The fact that we see these same stories repeated time after time after time, in publication after publication, and it's this echo chamber that gives them more credibility by repetition, even though there's no evidence there. And I think a major problem of Israel's mass rapes narrative, which is a result of the debunkings that we and others have done, is that there's no victim, and they desperately needed a victim. And so now they've come up with a victim, albeit not from October 7th. This woman, Amit
Right.
Susanna, doesn't claim that this incident of this vaguely described assault occurred on October 7th. She's saying it happened while she was in captivity. And so this is someone you can now present and try to silence the critics with, to say, you see, finally there is a victim, and if you don't believe this, you don't believe women. But it's important to recognize that this isn't some organic thing of this woman deciding to come out and speak and break her silence. This is a big story which the New York Times and clearly the Israeli propaganda apparatus that has been promoting it invested a lot of time and effort into, and that's the context you have to see it in. If this were a woman coming forward, someone, for example, like Tara Reid, who accused President Joe Biden of sexually assaulting her in the many years ago, but during the last campaign, she came out and said, "This happened to me." And she had contemporary witnesses from the time who said, yeah, she told us about this at the time. And again, 𝐓𝐴 went back and looked at how the New York Times reported on Tara Reid as a woman coming out with very little support and saying, this happened to me, a powerful man did this to me. And the New York Times was completely dismissive and actually went out and just did character assassination against Tara Reid. So again, it's not about whether I sitting here can say what this person is saying is true or not true, but I can look at how the propaganda apparatus treats a person who is going against someone they support, for example, Joe Biden, or serving a power they support. For example, in this case, the testimony of Amit Susana is serving Israel's genocidal anti-Palestinian narrative, and therefore they treat her as if there's no way she could be telling other than the truth. And that's what we have to be attentive to, how these stories are presented.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Ali. It's really important work uncovering these lies and fabrications and holding the New York Times to account.
An impossible task.
Yeah.
Holding them to account is an impossible task. And I think that's important. I'll just say this about it, because the people still have the idea that the New York Times is somehow doing its job badly when it tells these sorts of lies. But this is exactly its job is to tell these lies. And we go back to this because it's so crucial. The New York Times promoted the lies about weapons of mass destruction and helped lay the groundwork for the US aggression against Iraq, causing untold damage, untold death, untold disruption to millions of lives. And then later, after the deed was done, they came out with a mea culpa and said, maybe we should have been a bit more skeptical. I won't be surprised if the New York Times does do that in the future with this, when it's too late, when the job is already done. And the purpose of those mea culpas is never to actually say we learned the lesson and now we'll stop lying for the government and stop lying for Israel. The purpose is to restore their image in the eyes of the public so they can then come out and do it again. They can tell more lies for the powerful again. This is who they are, and this is their job.
That's right. And they'll keep collecting, polka awards and Pulitzers for this kind of
like Jeffrey Gettleman,
exactly,
the author of that fraudulent mass rape story of December 28th, Pulitzer Prize winner. I wonder if he'll be nominated and maybe win one for this bunch of lies. Let's see.
Would not be surprised.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.